Hello, everyone. Hello. I hope everybody got food and is feeling nourished. Sorry for the late start. It's just kind of been one of those days, one of those weekends. But I'm Camille Georges-Senesher. I'm the executive director of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective. And it feels really good to be here because I've lived in Montreal and Toronto for almost 10 years now, and this is actually my home territory. So if you're out at the ocean and you look through the bay, Galiano Island is where I grew up. So that's where I call home, and it's been quite amazing to hear a lot of the moderators and a lot of the panelists talk about different ideas of home in relation to how we have relationships with the ocean and how it connects us to different ideas of home. And I felt that really, really strongly yesterday. But yeah, I'm going to keep this really short because we are running quite behind. So I just really wanted to thank you all for coming, and to those that were with us yesterday at the Vancouver Art Gallery and here for the keynote last night. It's really great to see you again. And so for everybody that's just coming in fresh, welcome to Great Ocean Dialogues. This is an event that is possible with many different partnerships and kind of started conversations, I think a couple of years ago, with Tara kind of leading the charge and making it happen. So Tara's been a really amazing partner through this and really just developing really warm, thoughtful conversations and how to kind of talk about how we connect in these really delicate and intricate ways through the ocean. And I also want to thank my staff of the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective that are here. If you guys just want to stand up, it's Camille Larivier and Quill Christy Peters. So they're awesome. Nothing would be possible without you guys. It's an honor to work with you. And I also just want to thank Chris at the O'Dane Gallery that has just been so helpful making all of this happen. And Cheyenne Turians, who isn't here, but who was also really helpful in making all of this happen too. And just kind of a little bit of housekeeping. Canadian Heritage funded a lot of this and has been very helpful with the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective and making our gatherings possible. So thanks to them for giving us money to, make sure that everybody's fed and taken care of. And also the bathrooms are just located down the hallway. There's a horde of people because the Vancouver International Film Festival is also happening, so you kind of have to elbow your way there. But I think people are kind of funneling out now. And I think that's all I have. So I'm going to introduce briefly Celia Joseph, who also opened with the panel yesterday morning, and it was just an amazing, amazing moment. So Celia is just going to welcome us all into this space. So Celia Joseph is from the Squamish and Snuneymuxw First Nations on her father's side and is British and Jewish on her mother's. She graduated with a degree in First Nations and Indigenous Studies from the University of British Columbia and recently graduated from a year-long full-time immersion program in her language, Squamishnichum, at Simon Fraser University. Celia is the executive director of Cui-Out-Stelmec. Is that right? No. I'm learning my language partly, it's terrible, and is passionate about where she comes from. So let's give a warm welcome to Celia. Thank you so much.
Ossiam. Hasnach eog tanoia, Celia Joseph Queen Sna, Tanat Stopmis o Homeo. Not Squamish. Uns Squamish is the name of British Jewish Amen. Tun man nes Cora-Allan Chief Lloyd Joseph Siam. A Tunchisha nes Eve Joseph. On one aux tun squalwin Quinswood Clack. 8T Tinat. Chincomantomiop eoch stom Quinswood Clack 8T. Amen. On chin one aux T Tameo. ta stalk, ta shquen, tsak, smanite, not ta ahamasquium, slewit oth e schwotmistano. Jinkumantomi up not ta swahamchet e ta swahams ahamasquium e slewit oth amen. Hello, everybody. My name is Celia Joseph, and I come from the Squamish peoples and the Snuneymuxw peoples on my dad's side. My grandparents were Rose Thomas from Nanaimo and Larry Joseph from the village of Stotmas up in the Squamish Valley. And my mom is British and Jewish. And I just opened up in my language, Squamish Nachum, and I said that it's really nice to see you all here, that I really appreciate being here, and that it feels good to be called to do events like this that really resonate with me and that are upholding the teachings that so many of us have in common and how the water connects us. And I've been able to be at some of the panels and got to open it with my dance group alongside my Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh families, and it's felt really good to be here, and to think about how powerful it is just to put people together with different backgrounds and jobs and art practices and understandings of themselves as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and how we can be in dialogue with each other, and to be grounded specifically in the place that we are, and to be constantly throughout this gathering, reminded of where we are. There's been a lot of voices and presence from host nation, not just for openings, but with on panels, and I really appreciate that because it grounds our voices in the place where we are, which is, I think, crucial. And so it's been my pleasure to be a part of this, and thank you for asking me to come and open up today. And so I'm a baby when it comes to public speaking in regards to the elders in my community that have been doing this for so long, and I'm just learning my language over the last 2 years. So it feels great to be able to practice it and to speak it, and we do this practice because ancestors from this territory come to see what the work is happening. And so when you have people that come from that territory that speak the language, they speak to the ancestors first. And I let them know who I am and who my family is and why we've come here to gather on their territory. So it's a practice of sovereignty, but most of all respect. So thank you for carving out that space and letting me learn how to do this work. But what I do know is that our songs have the deepest power for healing and for prayer. And so I'm new to this, but these songs are old, so I'm happy to sing an old song and share some space for prayer with you all. So in thinking about the waters and thinking about these territories, I ask that we hold in our hearts deep reverence for all of the water protectors that have been come from this territory, and have had that deep love of the ocean and where they come from in their spirit, and that's gotten passed down. And I want to hold deep reverence for them in our heart, because there were a lot of people that took to the streets 2 days ago, and I really want to pay deep homage to the fact that people have been taken to these streets for thousands of years to do that same work, and that's happened on the shoulders of people that have been advocating for this territory for a very long time, and still do and continue to. So I'm going to sing a song, a Thunderbird song. It's a prayer song, and I want to hold that prayer in your hearts, to think about our water protectors and to think about what brought us all here today. And I want to dedicate it to my best friend Quill and her youth that have come from Thunder Bay, And she's been organizing this alongside the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective and the wonderful people at Vancouver Art Gallery and SFU. But she's reached out to me specifically to ask, like, who are the people in your community that inspire you and do great work, and I know that her amongst her team has really made this a beautiful event. But I just want to honor our relationship and sing a Thunderbird song and think not only how the ocean connects all these different places, but how our creatures and beings connect me to you also. And so from one Thunderbird person to the next, I would like to dedicate this to you and your youth, that you've come a very long way from Thunder Bay to be here today. And this song is the Ininyahahan song by Ray Nataro. And he gave this to his wife, who's my kin, so he's given this song to the Joseph family. And we're allowed to sing it.
Thank you so much, Celia. That was amazing. Yeah. So I'm just going to introduce the moderator for the next panel, which is Indigenous Art and Curation. So Freja Carmichael is going to be moderating the upcoming panel. Freja Carmichael is a curator who belongs to the Ngugi people of the Quandamooka Nation. As an independent curator, she works broadly across the cultural sector, dedicating her projects to the preservation and promotion of First Nations fiber art and collaborative curatorial approaches. So let's all welcome Freja and all the panelists to come up.
Yura, everyone. Hello, my name is Freja Carmichael, and I'd firstly like to start by thanking Selah for that really beautiful, warm welcome. Actually really calmed my nerves before getting up here and presenting this panel. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the people of these nations and the land and waters that we meet on today, and also pay my respects to all the First Nation people in the room and acknowledge you and all your ancestors. I'm up here with a panel that I had the opportunity to meet Daniel and Cora about earlier this year in March, and this is the first time meeting Michelle and Chrystal. So yeah, it's really nice to be able to get to know your practices more through being on this panel with you. And this morning our panel is focusing on Indigenous art and curation between a culturally specific and transnational contexts. And I guess I took that question too, is how we work across different spaces, places, working with different communities and travelling, but how we remain true to ourselves and our home communities. So I'll introduce the panel, but also they'll have the opportunity to really get up and talk about their practices. So the BC Collective, which stands for Before Cook and Before Columbius, was founded in 2017 as a way to share, engage and exchange Indigenous ideas and practices within the envelope of, I might check that pronunciation. Yep. And BC Collective is made up of Cora-Allan, Wickliffe and Daniel Twiss. And Chrystal Sparrow is a descendant of the Mcgeowan First Nation with bloodlines to Cree, Shuswap and Chilcotian ancestry. She is a third-generational carver and a multidisciplinary coastal Salish artist. Sparrow is the inaugural artist for the Mcgeowan, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh cultural residency at Stanley Park. Currently, she is pursuing a Master of Arts in Expressive Art Therapy with a minor in psychology in Switzerland. And Michelle McGeough is a Métis art historian, curator and assistant professor within the Art History, Visual Art and Therapy Department at the University of British Columbia with a PhD in Native American art history. Much of her research has focused on Indigenous non-binary identities. And I also thought as a visitor on these lands too, I would just locate myself, excuse me, while I get to the... yeah. As I mentioned, I belong to the Quandamooka people of Morgumpan, Moreton Island and Minjerribah, North Stradbroke Island. And our country is a beautiful saltwater country, and we are the people of the sand and the sea, Yulibirubi. And this is a special place for us, Pullan at Amity. And I work closely with my family and my mother and sister. I have my sister in the front row here, Lucy Carmichael. And we come from a family of weavers, and it's been very important to bring in those intergenerational practices as I move across different spaces. And I am one of the co-curators of Transit and Returns, and as part of my work in Transit and Returns, we had the first iteration in Brisbane at the Institute of Modern Art, and naturally becoming a curator with working in my community context too, and bringing that into the international dialogue. And this is a photo with some of our co-curators of my elder Uncle Bob Anderson. And also as working across different spaces, working with my Quandamooka community and our Brisbane Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and working in these different spaces, especially here with the Transit and Returns community we've been building. So I'll pass over to Chrystal, and if you'd like to introduce yourself and talk a bit more about your practice. There we go. So are you able to see the laptop? Yeah.
So which one's forward?
This one's forward, the right's forward.
Okay, great, this is on. Okay, so my name's Chrystal Sparrow. I come from the Mcgeowan First Nations, and I am a third-generation Coast Salish artist. I was traditionally mentored from my late father, Irving Sparrow, who was a master carver. I grew up learning about Coast Salish designing and carving techniques as a child, not really knowing that it was art until I got a little bit older. I'm very honored that at this time in my life I can look back, and really proud that my father decided to teach me the importance of Coast Salish art history and carving. Carving is mainly done by males, but my father decided that I was strong enough and talented enough and smart enough to find my way through carving. So I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm also a fourth generation fisherwoman. I grew up fishing since I was about 10 years old with my dad as his deckhand. I used to joke and say that it was free child slave labor, but it was lots of fun. That's something I'm very, very proud of as well, that my father decided that I would be also strong enough to be a fisherwoman, and I enjoy that every summer. Unfortunately, this summer there wasn't any fishing, so I've been a little bit down about that because I just really love being on the water. So I've spent my early years learning about Coast Salish art, and I find that I'm still learning quite a bit about being a female Coast Salish artist and my personal experiences, and still learning and working through other artists who don't think that I'm strong enough to be a carver. So I'm always kind of working through that. So the first piece that I brought to show is a 20-foot house post. It's a female house post with a killer whale, a Coast Salish killer whale that my brother worked on with me. And this was for the Vancouver School Board this year. So it was a great project. My brother and I work very well together, and we spent about 6 months working at the Britannia Community Centre at their carving pavilion, and we had the Vancouver School Board district bringing their classrooms to have the children come and learn about Coast Salish art. Also, because I'm working towards being an art therapist, I found it a great opportunity for children to be very interactive. So they were, walking around the house post, they were touching the house post, they were drawing on the house post, which was great. And that was my brother's idea. It was brilliant. They just had such an amazing time. Nobody got hurt. The teachers were so surprised that, they were like, wow, these kids are just, and we had brooms, so they were sweeping up the sawdust, and they had so much fun. And what was neat at the end of each classroom visit is my brother would do a carving demo, and they would all get a red cedar chip. And they were so excited, like they were just holding it like it was gold. And they're like, I'm going to give this to my mother. I'm going to give this to my brother. It was just so neat. So this piece was just recent, and it was so powerful in that it represented females. And I really wanted to also include that it was for all females. It was for all women in Vancouver. It just wasn't for Coast Salish women. And so this was a really great piece to work on. And there's just kind of a view from there, and there's another one there. She's got copper eyes. This is red cedar, and the cedar is 300 years old, from what I was told. And she was just a great project to work on and very powerful. I didn't expect there to be this real connection until I would say about midway, where I started to refer to her as this real woman. Like it was like, everything's gonna be okay. We're gonna get your cheeks out. Oh my God. It was just like, it was really neat to have that experience, and I'll never forget that. And I think it's opened up my eyes to see that other works that I'll be working on in house posts that are traditional to Coast Salish is that I can now have this real personal connection with them, and there can be some, I guess, magic that can come from that. Maybe there's some spiritual messages from there. I'm not sure, but I find that that's something that I actually look forward to now. This is a photo. It's like more like a personal kind of journey. I'm taking photos of myself, and I'm taking my work, and I'm kind of taking ancestors, and I'm kind of just fusing them together and just seeing what I can discover. And it's through an app called PixArt, and I purchased the app so I can use it more often. And I'm just really, I think it's part of my journey. In this part of being an artist, that I wanted to connect to the past. I'm wanting to connect to the present time, and possibly to the future with kind of just exploring this. So this is kind of, something that I'm currently working on right now. And this is a red cedar hat that I made. It's my first one, and I painted it. This was a really great experience. It reminded me of my great-grandmother from Sechelt, who was a very prominent weaver in basketry. She just made these really beautiful pieces, and my aunt has a couple of them. So when I was working on this hat, it was really bringing up kind of those memories of maybe this is some sort of connection to my great-grandmother from Sechelt. And this is a panel that I carved again with my brother Christopher. It's an eagle with a very simple weaving design on the bottom. And this, we worked with youth at the Broadway Youth Center, and this was in part of the 150-year birthday for Canada. But this was with Starbucks and their 150 Wishes campaign. So we worked with youth, and we had a video made of us working on it and painting it. This was in 2007, I believe. Yeah, it was 2007. So this is 7 feet. It's red cedar. It's about 3 feet in kind of width. And yeah, this was a really fun piece. I believe we called it Salish Strength. And the youth were very good. They were really. I find that youth who are kind of in the urban communities are really open to learning, and they kind of are exploring art, kind of in their time of trying to think back to where they come from, and so it's really nice to kind of connect with them that way. This is a piece. It's a personal piece. It's called Mythical Meeting, and it's felt on, I think it's deer leather, and I just wanted to work on something that was a bit more colorful and kind of like the wild woman. You hear stories about the wild woman, and there's like various stories about her, and I kind of wanted to work on that, and as well as eagles. I really love carving eagles. I love drawing eagles. They're kind of something that I go to quite often. It kind of reminds me of the sea as well, because her hair is kind of flowing, and if I were to maybe change the background to a blue, it could be something that's maybe like underworld or something like that when I look at it sometimes. This kind of reminds me of my Cree heritage as well. I kind of think of that in colors and beadwork. So that was a piece I worked on. And there's my brother and I, my youngest brother Simpson. We're out crabbing, and crabbing is really hard. Like, fishing's hard work, and being a deckhand and picking up the net, throwing the fish, just pitching them in the hatch. And I mean, I do a lot of hard work that 2 guys would do on some boats, and I'm one woman doing that work. But crabbing is like these traps are like 60 pounds, and you got to stack them 5, up, and it's just a lot of work. So I won't be crabbing at all. It's just too much. But yeah, this picture really resonates with the Salish Sea. Like I said, I just grew up fishing, and I love it so much, and I find that more so in the last few years, I've really been inspired just by looking at salmon, looking out on the water. I think of my great-grandfather. I think of my grandfather as well when I'm out there, and I just get inspired. And sometimes I kind of ask, am I doing this right? Is this where I should be? And with my work, and I look at salmon and I get inspired because I see their like patterns, I see their scales, I see their face, and I'm like, yeah, that's really neat. That's something that I want to put in my work. So yeah, fishing is a big thing for me. This is my brother Christopher. He's, like I mentioned, we've worked together, and this is his piece. And I'm a big fan of his work. I really love his work, and I have some of his work. I purchased some of his work. I kind of joke him, like, you should just give me stuff. Like, it's like, he's like, no. So this piece I really love. It's yellow cedar. And yeah, I just am very, very inspired. And I think working as an artist, you can really learn a lot from other artists. And I do learn a lot from my brother. He's a year younger than me, but he's spent a lot more time in years carving than I have. So I always let him know that I want to learn from him, and that I don't get an ego. I don't get, I don't feel like it's, something that I shouldn't do. I think it is. I respect that he is also a great artist, and so I'm just very, very proud of him. This is a piece, again, this is an eagle that I love carving, and this one is 8 feet, and it's yellow cedar, and it's an eagle that kind of in flight, and this was for the 2010 Winter Olympics, and it's permanently at the Thunderbird hockey arena. And I carved this piece all by myself. I got no help. My dad and brother were very proud that I got a piece to work on for the Olympics. And I said, I am going to carve this all by myself. I am not going to get any help. I could ask for tips here and there, and I was so proud. I had bent blades, I had chisels, I had all these tools. And, 8 feet by 3 feet, it was such an amazing piece. It was 6 inches thick. So it was quite a thick piece that I could kind of experiment on. So this is a piece I'm very proud of. Very simple. I find that my work really is simple, and it has a lot of movement. I find maybe that's more of a feminine maybe perspective, that it doesn't have to be all kind of like fitted together. So I was experimenting on the wings, and so that kind of has layers to it, and that's something that I kind of like in my work as well. And you can't really, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm on the one corner, my brother's on the other corner, kind of holding it up. So that kind of gives you a little bit of reference of how large it is. And this piece I called Salish Beauty. And this is a piece carved by my father, and you can get an idea of his work. This is an eagle catching salmon. And this is in red cedar. It's stained in like a teak wood stain. And this is a piece that I just really love of his. My dad just really had this natural ability. He was actually an innate artist. In preschool, he was already sculpting dinosaurs with plasticine. And his teacher was like really impressed. And I haven't found the picture yet, but she had told me that I think it was the Vancouver Sun. They came down and took pictures of him. He was in this like tire, and he was really shy, and he was in the middle, and he had all these little sculpted dinosaurs all like around, and they took pictures of him. So he was very gifted, and what he had taught me is when you're looking at your work, sketch your work, but go out and see nature. Go out and look at pictures. Don't just draw things from like a side view. Like draw them in motion. Draw them with like being rounded and like having shape, having some kind of form to them. So that's something that I really learned from my father, and I really hope that I can take that into my work. And so that's a piece from him. And this is the last piece, a piece that I worked on again with photo and kind of art and kind of the past. So something that I'm very interested in kind of pursuing more outside of carving and things like that. I also want to share that I've got a great opportunity. I'm working at UBC as the Indigenous land-based art and culture advisor in the Indigenous Partnership and Applied Biology program. And so what my part of my work is to bring protocol into the UBC farm, as well as marking space that's culture, that's in respect to space. It's UBC is very keen on, developing and kind of taking space. And so my work is to bring in protocol. So I'm learning currently right now from the elders in Mcgowan, as well as other professionals in kind of the land department. And I believe they've got some sort of, I believe they do have some laws, some hopefully policies around protocol. So I'll be taking that, as well as my experience as an artist and being creative in these meetings, to bring artwork that marks space, that marks protocol. That's not just a piece of work that's situated in a space. It actually has some meaning. It actually has law. It actually has something. It has a really important purpose to it. So I hope that, I won't be creating any of the beautiful work because I work. So, because I work there, it's a conflict of interest. But I definitely will be looking for artists to come and take part in that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much, Chrystal. Hear from Michelle.
Yes, I am. Tanse, Kikosawan Michelle McGeough, Mcgowan. Hello, my name is Michelle McGeough, and I come from the traditional territories known as Beaver Hills. I, first of all, want to express my gratitude at being here and express my gratitude to the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I am a visitor in their territories, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about my experience. I left my home community over 30 years ago, and 13 of those years have been in the United States, and I've just recently returned to Canada. And basically, being a queer two-spirit individual, sometimes having to leave your home community is one of the options that is open to you in terms of your own survival. So in terms of kind of the circuitous route that I've taken is that I've lived in many different places, and a lot of my work has been with Indigenous communities around curation in the United States. That's where most of my experience has been. I have done some curatorial works here in Canada, working with Indigenous artists, but for the most part, it was in the United States. I was very fortunate. I started out as a practicing artist, and I ran away from home, and I went to the Institute of American Indian Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and that is where I started my artistic education. And then I actually came up from IAIA and attended Emily Carr. So I finished off my BFA at Emily Carr. So I've kind of done this route, and then I ended up going out east to do my master's degree. And before I even finished my master's degree, I was offered a position at the Wheelwright Museum of the Native American Indian, and I was specifically going to work on an exhibition of work that was created by children that attended the Santa Fe Indian School from about 1918 to 1945. And the similar kind of experience in terms of the residential school. IA was a bit of a little, The residential school in Santa Fe was a little bit of an anomaly in some instances just because of the individuals that were involved. And perhaps you might have heard of Dorothy Dunn and the studio and the fact that she encouraged Indigenous students to actually create paintings that dealt with their everyday life, in some instances ceremony. So it was a very, very fraught kind of project. And I was working with a private collector. So one of the things in terms of trying to figure out my way through, because I am in territories that are not my own, I have to understand what is the protocol specifically for working within these communities. And so one of the things that I was able to do is to form an advisory group of contemporary artists whose parents also had attended the Santa Fe Indian School. And from this advisory committee, I was able to kind of find ways in which to bring Indigenous knowledge into the museum space and to treat this material in the way that I felt it needed to be seen, because these were also documents. They're visual documents of a way of life at a particular moment in time. And the connections that families had with that, seeing their grandparents, their aunties and their uncles, people that they did not know had created work or had even painted at one time in their life. And so it was really very enriching to kind of see how you have the collectors on one hand looking at this work, and then seeing how the families interacted with this work. So one of the things that I was very fortunate also was that I worked with two elders, really very respected elders from the community, Tony Reina, who was from the Tawas Pueblo, and Geronima Montoya Cruz, who was from one of the other pueblos that is just kind of lost. I've just totally lost it right now. But she was actually an individual that worked extensively with the students, and Dorothy Dunn was only there for maybe 4 years, and when she left, Geronima took over that position and was the teacher. And so that's a history that's very, very seldom talked about. But like I said, a lot of times these activities that they were talking about or painting were the everyday activities, things that happened on an annual basis within the community. So one of the things that was suggested in terms of how do we display this rather than doing it in this kind of linear way according to dates. So I was advised by one of the elders is that, maybe we should look at this in terms of seasons, the cyclical nature. And so it is another way of kind of bringing this arrangement into the gallery space and presenting it in this particular way rather than following a linear pattern, because this is more in keeping with Indigenous epistemologies and ways of knowing. So while I was there, I actually had the invitation to return to the Institute of American Indian Art as a professor, and I taught in the curatorial program. And if you don't know about the Institute of American Indian Art, it is the only institution of its kind in terms of just the history it has, but also the training of artists that number of people that have actually gone through its doors. And that, there is this connection that many of us that are alumni from the institution, yes, we went there and we all talk about what years we went, that kind of thing. We have, if you haven't, there's the Indian market that happens every year. So it's kind of a gathering place for us to kind of come together and find out what everybody's been doing in terms of their career. But the Institute of American Indian Art was really an unusual experience for me, because we were encouraged to teach our students to utilize Indigenous knowledge and to base our curatorial practices around Indigenous knowledge. And it was a little bit, you might think, a little bit of a daunting task because of the numbers and different tribal communities that were attending the Institute. So it becomes this way, like, how do we incorporate Indigenous knowledge when there's so many different types of Indigenous knowledge out there? So we built the program, and it was a museum studies program. It's the only bachelor degree in museum studies that I think exists in North America. I know in North America, but I'm not sure about elsewhere. And so as a consequence, we would teach the students curatorial practices. We taught them collections care. And so rather than being really prescriptive about it, often what we taught them were models so that they could go back to their community, find out what the resources were, find out what the protocol was in their community. And many of our students were actually going back to our communities because of, in the United States, there's the NAGPRA, which is the, Graves Protection. That's right. So repatriation. So repatriation in the U.S. is a law. And it's effective in some ways and ineffective in other ways. But what's happening is Indigenous communities were receiving notification that their relatives were in these collections. And so they were trying to find out ways of bringing them back, and these entities, and bringing them back into the community. And how do we do this? How do we do this in a good way? In some instances, communities, refused to accept things or these entities because it was like, we don't know, we have no protocol for welcoming these entities back. You took them, you deal with it. And so that's where a lot of the programming at the Institute in the museum studies was around. Is like, what do you do? How do you gather your resources? How do you tap into the community? How do you work with elders, people that have this knowledge? And also an understanding that there are different types of knowledge that we have access to as individuals, and that there is firmly in place a lot of protocols in terms of what kinds of knowledge you have access to, and how do you respect that, and how do you find these ways of involving people that have, this history with institutional spaces that have put their relatives on display without, the proper protocols and respect. And so it's like, how do you kind of build up that trust within the community for what you're doing? So that was, a great experience in terms of having that opportunity, to work with all these really, really passionate individuals who were welcoming, their relatives back into their community. And I think that was perhaps, like the biggest gift to me in terms of my entire career. I don't think anything will ever kind of come close, in terms of that. We used to do like a course that we taught was an introduction to curation. And so this was, the students would only have one semester to figure out an exhibition, gathering the material for the exhibition, prepping the gallery space, and they did it every time. They made the deadlines. And we had some really interesting kinds of exhibitions, and it was just like, as a professor, you're there to mentor. You're there to kind of help smooth out, some of the difficulties, like getting the supplies or learning how to get quotes for programs, those kinds of, every kinds of activities that, you think about curation, that it's not the romantic side of it, but it's the drudgery of it. And so this particular exhibition was called Footworks, and what students did is the exhibition was just filled with all different kinds of shoes and reiterations of shoes. And it was really gratifying in terms of seeing what students were able to accomplish. And then we also taught a course where students would put together exhibition proposals. And because some of our students were practicing artists, the exhibition proposals were something that we would hope that they would take to a gallery and produce their own exhibition of their own work. So very practical kinds of hands-on kinds of things. When I was in Santa Fe, I also got the opportunity to work with Rose Simpson, who is just like this absolutely wonderful artist. And she taught me so much about being a curator in terms of trusting that she had, her own vision, and basically all I was there to do as a curator was to provide her with the space, give her the money, what she needs to do. And when the people in conservation were upset about the materials, because she was bringing in adobe, which is straw and mud, into the space, it's just like, don't worry about it. It's only for 3 months. And so, I've always been kind of very hands-off in terms of working with artists, and just basically because I've more or less believed that they knew what they needed to do, and I'm just there to kind of run interference for them. When I was a graduate student, yes, I just finished my PhD not that long ago, about 2 years ago, and so, so it's been a very long route. But I was very fortunate that I received an internship to work with the collection at the Indigenous Arts Center in Gatineau. And I put together 2 exhibitions one summer, and basically one was dealing with Indigenous abstractions, and the other one was looking at Indigenous women, and in particular the roles that they play, because they're not only artists often in our communities, but also activists, lawyers, mothers, have so many different kinds of roles, and I really wanted to kind of honor that, and so that was the exhibition that I've done. I haven't had much of an opportunity to do too much in terms of curation. I've only been back in BC, so we're talking about transit and returns. I'm back again. And it kind of seems, I seem to follow this route where I kind of end up in the desert, end up in the ocean, and then end up on the East Coast. And so I kind of follow always. So talking about transit and returns, that's the story of my life. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Daniel Twiss. I'm the son of Richard and Catherine Twiss. Richard was a Lakota man from South Dakota, and my mother is a Welsh woman from England. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell. But no, it's been really great to be here, and yeah, I do want to acknowledge the people here and acknowledge the land. And as long as we're here, we'll respect your lore. And yeah, the show has been an amazing opportunity, an amazing journey, and all the things that have come about. Yeah, it's been very special. But yeah, my intros are very short, so I'll pass this mic along.
O whakalofalahi atu ki Ramatulu Osi, ko e hingoa haku Cora-Allan Wickliffe, ko e hingoa haku mātua tāne Kele Lawhaiki, ko e Mātu Whiwhine, hingoa haku Leslie Wickliffe, ko e hingoa haku Daniel Twiss, ka Pisinga, ko e Chaske Washte, Tama. Kia ora koutou. Ko Cora-Allan tuku ingoa, ko Te Aroha te maunga, ko Waiho te awa, ko Waikato te waka, ko Tainui te iwi, ko Tuipa te marae. I'm Māori Niuean, so I can introduce myself in both tongues, which I have the privilege of knowing. I was raised knowing my culture, and when I went to university, everyone talked about this idea of being an urban Indigenous person or urban Māori, and I was like, oh yeah, me too. And then I realized, oh, hold on, I went to all my tribal lands, to my marae, I learned all my dances, I know my tongue, and so then it was realizing, no, I know myself, and amongst that, then meeting Daniel, who's Lakota, my family thinks Daniel's super cool because he's Native American, and so living in Aotearoa, and also having our kid, which thank you very much for, especially Freja, for allowing us to just have him on the side here. He is a ticking time bomb, and so just actually having him quiet is really awesome. But for us too, and part of our collective is we take our family everywhere we go. and some of the artists that we spent time with at a residency in Banff, and the audience know that he was with us then too. And so BC Collective kind of came about because Māori, Niuean, Lakota, and all the questions that come with that. And when we're on this side of the world, I get all the questions. When we're on my side of the world, he gets all the questions. And a lot of times people would come up to us and find out Daniel's Native and, oh, I've got a book, I've got a CD. Have you watched Last of the Mohicans, Dances with Wolves, and stuff like that. And we kind of were sick of hearing about those things. And we're like, there's more. Do you want to know more? And so we created BC Collective before Cook, before Columbus, to talk about ideas from our cultures before all those generalizations were made. And we started actually off with fry bread. So I think Māori fry bread is the best because, you know, it's big, it's fat, it's fluffy, and we have tons of butter and golden syrup. And that's how I was raised, that's how you eat it. And then this guy comes along, and their fry bread's massive with meat, cheese, lettuce. I'm like, what? What is this? And so we decided to start with a commonality. And so we started with food. And our very first exchange with our communities to just create a bridge to share knowledge was Indian tacos in New Zealand. And as soon as we had this pop-up stand sharing food, have you tasted Māori fry bread? Have you tasted this? And then it would just create this awesome conversation that was away from the Last of the Mohicans, that was away from hairdressers, that was away from Pocahontas for Daniel. And also our son, he goes to Kohanga, so he's in full immersion Māori. And Daniel, a man of little words, our collective is very reflective of him being Lakota, but being in a full te reo Māori space. And I remember one day, I'm just going to say this, I went to pick them up, and I walk into the kohanga, and Daniel's mopping the floors, and then a baby starts crying. He runs over, picks the baby up, and he's, like shushing him. Then another baby's crying, and then he's just working his way in a Māori space, having to learn all Māori protocols, and he's with all women. And so there's no other men, and so he's this also to Māori, other Indigenous cultures are really special, and so they've definitely taken a liking to him. But his experience in Aotearoa is very reflective, and even in the kohanga, of how our collective has had to be very transnational, and him finding out how to be a Lakota male in a Māori female space. And then when I went to his res this year, it was my turn to kind of get tested, and I was on my best behavior. And I passed the test because I got all these beaded gifts, and it was awesome. But BC has definitely just been about us sharing our family, and it hasn't come from any huge academic space. It hasn't come from us wanting to talk on panels or show in the most amazing gallery, Vancouver Art Gallery. It's just basically come from, I'll go back one. It's basically come from us combining what we know from our backgrounds, what we do, and just making work together. And being able to travel with my partner and having an artist partner is tedious at times. Just got to be honest. And Lana and Louisa, who we're here with, they saw us try and put this wallpaper up at this last show. And so the elements in our current work are so we started with Indian taco, then we went deeper, and we started looking at parts of our culture that we want to share even more, and we started using ceramics, and I'll let you talk about that. And I'm a traditional hiapo maker, so it's a bark cloth maker from the Pacific. I'm the only known maker alive for my island. My island is the most beautiful island in the Pacific. We also were named Savage Island because Cook tried to land 3 times, and he couldn't make it on because my people were covered in blood. It was red bananas, it wasn't blood. And so the practice and this beautiful heritage knowledge that I know we're able to share through BC and creating these meals. And so some of the intricate parts in our actual dining setting refer to those traditional knowledges and just the kind of empowerment that's been passed down to us through our art practices and our skills. And I'll let you talk about the ceramics.
Yeah, the ceramics was a bit of a journey to take in the beginning. I really had an affinity for it. I really loved working with ceramics. I loved, it was just play. In the beginning, it was just pure play and joy, and that's what I felt. But as we moved through our practices, we got the opportunity to go to South Dakota, like Cora said, and we went to Sioux Pottery, which is a place that I've visited many times. We own a lot of their stuff, and it was there that we sort of learned a little bit more about sort of where Sioux pottery came from and pottery in general amongst Lakota people, and it was mainly through the boarding schools. It was a way to teach Native people a way to integrate themselves through either sewing or cooking or making pots or the like. So that's understanding where that came from and understanding that history. It was a strange journey to kind of take from that point on, and a perspective to carry as I moved through it, and trying to reclaim and always reshape how clay reshapes. I mean, it was something that we just wanted to redo and integrate into our work pretty well. But also, I discovered that at one of the Lakota pottery, my great grandmother, she actually worked there. And so Cora, she is a private eye in another life, and she tracked down a vase that is actually in the center of the table. Cora's given me gifts in the past, and I knew this was different because she pulled out her cell phone and started recording, and she was so mad that I didn't cry. It was just, all she wanted was some tears, but yeah, so it was a special moment, but yeah, it was beautiful that everything kind of came full circle and I could touch something from the past that my ancestors actively engaged with.
And so that piece of pottery is in the middle of our setting at our current work at the VAG. And for us, it's just also a reminder of where we come from and everything that has brought us here. And it's kind of a beautiful circle. And he didn't cry, but I was like, oh, I was so disappointed because to have the whakapapa, the lineage of your grandmother there, it's tear-worthy. But our dinner and our space came from this idea of, we've done Indian tacos, so let's make this beautiful, awesome space so when we're in it, people can just admire our talents, admire our beautiful cultural talents. And also we thought, what could make this space amazing? And then Louisa Afor, who is of Samoan Pākehā descent, she's at the back there. We thought, let's bring Louisa in to collaborate with, and she creates these amazing wallpapers. And the wallpapers they're filled with memories. There's symbols and images from our childhood, they remind us of the food that, not that everyone knows that we cook, but the food that was a staple because it's cheap canned food, flour to make fry bread, pigs that get used in ceremony, and there's a crab up there that's a coconut crab, and that's specific to my island. It's a Cora-Allan, and it's a delicacy. And so just having that as the backdrop to talk about food and sovereignty was a really beautiful way to tie everything in. And so those are some of our... So if you notice, there's like a cup and it's sunken into the table because our current version now, there's a buffalo horn cup on top of the table, but when we first created this work, we didn't know how to sit it in. So me and my dad made holes in the table to sit the cup in. And so it's been this continuous development of work, and actually being able to host people in the space was something that we can't do here, but we had a dinner prior. And so all the dishes that are on the table were actually created for specific Indigenous dishes. And so we made dishes for the Indian taco, for seafood dishes. And I remember Freja, she actually tasted the luau, which is coconut and taro leaves, and her mouth was getting numb, and she's like, is it meant to be tingly? And I was like, no. But she just got the smile like, my lips are numb. And so we've definitely had some experiences over the dinner. And so when we had the meal here, we had Daniel's brother, Philip Twiss, cook, professional chef, so that, just in case that happened again. And this is just the final image of, it's kind of where we started. That's the Lakota symbol for meal. And this is the Indian taco plate. So it's slightly smaller than a piece of fried bread, so it just keeps the hot fat off your hand, but you can eat all your way around it. And so all our dishes are specific to catering for our people, to catering for how we eat. And we also made these dishes that hold baked papaya and panipopo, or coconut bun, which it's got a spout, like slurp at the end of the juice, because you want to. And so for us, it's been also fun to play with those kinds of dynamics of making things fun for our people. And so that's who we are as a collective.
We've all got microphones here too, so sharing. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your work and practices. And I think we all are doing quite different things, but one common thread I could see was the importance of processes. And we're not just focusing on the final output, but really that importance of collaboration and relationship building. And McGeough, you really talked about that with your developing the advisory committee to work together on your project, and the importance of family collaborations. And Chrystal, you also spoke about working really collaboratively with your family. I was just wondering, Chrystal, if you could talk more about your work at UBC and the importance of engaging with that development of work. And
Okay, well, it's still in the early stages. I think my approach is to go to the Mcgowan First Nations, where I'm from. And I'm very fortunate that I come from the Sparrow family. It's quite a large family, very outspoken family, who have a lot of knowledge. And so I'm at this point seeking knowledge in regards to protocol, history around land. I believe we do have some land codes that have been worked on, I think, in the last 10 years. And so that's my early approach. But where I'm starting is I'm actually seeking advice from the elders to talk about, their perspective around sharing land. What does it mean when they grew up? Kind of what was there. So far I've heard a lot of practical stories around taking care of families, taking care of your children, working together. Men were always working together; they weren't alone. Same with the women, and there was this real idea of respect in their home, outside of their home. So I find that approaching my community, approaching the elders, approaching individual elders, and then going into the community, youth, chief and council, will be towards the end, to get the support. But it's really just building a real strong kind of timeline with stories, with culture, with teachings that I can take to UBC with the support of Chief and Council and the elders and the whole community overall, with the land code as well, is I'd like to create a presentation that will teach those in UBC, kind of in those faculties that will be working with us around how the Mcgowan First Nations work. You know, they come from knowledge. They have stories. They have a way of doing things that's not always around policies. That's not always around, you know, what is working for the development and benefiting on the land. That it's really just also learning a little bit about the UBC farm. You know, it's a beautiful space, and I think it needs to be shared. And so how I'm going about it is not so much academic around creating this presentation with, you know, all these colors of, you know, what should be, you know, kind of categorized and how we're going to work together. So that's how that's working, and I look forward to presenting that within the next year. And so, yeah.
Thanks, Chrystal. And so we do wear many hats, and I often describe that. I was recently at a symposium at the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair in Australia in the Northern Territory, and the symposium brought together a group of curators and arts workers, and coming together from very diverse experiences and from regional and remote parts of Australia. We kind of opened up the question around curating, and we all kind of agreed that the word curator didn't suit the work we were doing. And we collectively came up with the term cultural keepers. We thought that cultural keepers really responded to what we were all doing, wearing the many different hats. So I might put that question to us all too, around if you relate to that kind of cultural keepers. And as I can see, that's something, that deep respect to culture and elders, and how there is no separation between art and culture. And often when working in institutions or different contexts, sometimes it can be separated, and that's something, a challenge I often find is highlighting the importance of relationships and collaborations and processes when it comes to our spaces of presenting our stories and our culture. Yeah, so maybe we might talk around that, cultural keepers, if that relates.
There you go. Just the idea of cultural keepers, because in our island, the knowledge of Hiapo can only be passed to bloodline. And so you can only teach to anyone in your bloodline, or but the thing is that's where some of our knowledge died out. And because I have the kind of, island where people cover their hands to weave, because they don't want to share their family's special weaving technique. I know we're the only island that does it. And but it's this idea that this is our family talent, this has come from our blood, and so we're going to preserve it. And the only known piece of Hiapo that's not in the institutional space is at the government house in Niue. So there's a reason for that. It's so protected. And I get asked a lot via Instagram or Facebook, social media. I get messages like, "Oh, can I use your patterns for tattoos? I'm Niuean." And we didn't have that kind of culture, and for me, it just didn't feel right. And so, but I've always come to this crossroads of how much do I share, how much do I give back, or and so at the moment, just that idea of how we look after our special knowledges, because especially with Pacific bark cloth and tapa. I'm a curator back home, and so I've had a couple of exhibitions where we've had cloth makers come in, and they've just let me touch whatever I want because they know I can handle the material, they know I know it. But I've seen them in other spaces, and they're standing right next to people touching it. And so being a maker and a curator has really, especially with Pacific or Māori Indigenous work, has, for me, been such an awesome blend because I have that trust, because I have that knowledge of material. And so just along the lines of that, cultural keepers, that's such a beautiful saying. Like it really resonates with me because of, I am super protective of all the knowledge I know, and it's taken me a long time to get here. And because I am the only maker, there are people knocking on my door for academic purposes, but for me, I started making because my grandparents wanted to make sure that their bodies were wrapped up in hiapo cloth when they passed away. And for people that wanted hair cutting ceremonies, so my cloth was for those purposes, and so I protect it in a way where I just share enough, but yeah, that's been something I've struggled with navigating.
Yeah. Was there anyone else who wanted to?
I think that in terms of not only cultural keepers, but we're also mediators, that we have this role that we are, as I'm speaking as a curator in the institutional space, and so we're constantly mediating between the expectations of that space and then community, the artists, and again, in terms of how much do you share, how much do you not share, and learning to kind of respect those lines that have been basically drawn, and within the community. But then the institution is just like get in and push as much as you possibly can within the institution, and make that space our space.
I'm aware we're getting closer to our time, and just wanted to see if there was any questions between each other that you wanted to ask before we open up for questions on the floor. Any? No? Yeah? Yeah?
Hello? No. I'm really thinking about that topic that we were just like that you just answered about, like, I don't want to call it cultural gatekeeping, but this idea of that, and like listening to how we preserve our ceremonies, preserve who we are, but also how do we navigate the letting in and what goes out and comes in? Because, and perhaps gatekeeping is maybe the wrong word, because it's like, I don't know if it's even intentional, because I do understand when something's been banned, or essentially you were persecuted if you practiced who you were, which is like something that's very real and still quite visceral, and we see the effects of that here in so-called Canada and so-called United States, where practices were banned, and then people hold really tight to that. But then there comes the issues of when certain people with those ceremonies, those teachings, the cultural knowledge pass, and it goes kind of with them. And then we see this kind of like cultural apocalypse almost happening. How do we hold space for that, and how do we rectify that, and how do we, what do we do? Because I feel you on that, because it's like, who else could weave in a certain way other than where that bloodline comes from, because it's very specific and super important that it keeps that way, right? And then how, for those folks that maybe were adopted out, that other complications, stuff like that, how do we navigate those folks getting that knowledge? Because they're, but also it's about lineage, it's about where you come from, and then what happens with those huge gaps where you're like, I don't know, like who are those elders that I'm supposed to be talking to, stuff like that. I'm just like thinking about that a lot, and yeah. So yeah, get you Miigwech for your words and sharing on that. And if you guys wanted to speak to that at all, because I think that's something that comes up quite a bit in our works. Yeah.
I have a circle of mamas, we call them, that I navigate that path with. And one of the Cook-Island ladies, I asked her, oh, how do you teach your woven flower? And she basically said, I teach them the basic one and I keep the good stuff for myself. And I'm like, oh, so I just have like a dumbed down version? And she's like, yeah, we teach them the one that's like just enough so they think they know. And when I was on the island of Samoa, I was being taught the practice of tapa and whapito. I watched her do a tour, a demonstration for tourists, and she taught them like 20% of what she had taught me over the week. And so I started to see, oh, okay, we can share, but it depends on the maker and the context and the person. And when I get asked about teaching workshops, I don't want to teach people that want to learn or dabble. I want practitioners. I want someone who's going to get in the dirt like me, grow my own plants, go into the bush, use a machete, chop your own plants down, gather your own seeds, and spend weeks making your dyes. And that's the kind of person I want to teach. Does that person come around often? Heck no. We're too busy doing other things. And so for me, I treat the knowledge in that way. And so I'm teaching my cousin and my sister currently because they are stubborn as heck and they can last the journey. And so those are the kind of people I want to teach and pass knowledge to. I know as a younger contemporary artist and wanting to know traditional knowledge and mix it in with contemporary, that happens, all the time. But for this particular knowledge, it won't and doesn't, because I guess I am the gatekeeper. But also I have a grandmother who I was asked to be interviewed about my practice, and I asked my nana, oh, do you know this lady Lolo? And she goes, oh, she's bad. Don't talk to her. And then 2 months later, my nana said, oh, yeah, you can talk to her. I was talking to her mum at the laundromat. She's nice. And I know. And so my gatekeeper is my nana, so she will say yes or no. And so with that exchange is always fluid. And when my grandfather passed this year, his burial cloth was the one I made, and it was the first one anyone had seen since the 1900s. And so my nana was like, oh, yeah, no, you can share as much as you want now because the Niuean people want it, they need it. And also she gets lots of people at church saying, oh, I heard your granddaughter on the radio. And so now I'm able to share, but I kind of had to just wait. The timing had to be right.
Was there? Oh, yeah.
I think that's a really good question, and I think in terms of that we have to recognize what we've gone through and the knowledge that has been lost, but then culture is constantly evolving and new things, new ways, new knowledge, we're constantly bringing that in. You look at our artistic practice and the way that we're constantly bringing in new materials, new ideas, and I think that we have to be really careful that we don't get stuck in the past and trying to replicate the past, but take what we have and look towards, building different kinds of protocols that are more appropriate to our contemporary reality and the future that we envision, for ourselves and for all of our relations.
And just in relation to that, I think too, sometimes when you're talking about our contemporary realities, I found it really hard to have a sustainable practice living out of the Pacific. Sorry. And it is that reality that I do think that if our ancestors had access to sharper knives, bigger knives, or whatever was needed to make the cloth, they would have used it, to make things faster and easier. But I found that just during my process, I'm just such a purist and wanting to do it the hardest way. And then I've got older ladies like, oh, just use the hammer, telling me just use something else. But I'm just like, no, if they did it in the bush, and she's like, but they had no choice, And so just navigating that to have a sustainable traditional practice, and also what is around us. And some of our plants don't grow the same, but yeah.
Hi, I'm on your left. I have a question for Chrystal. I think maybe building on the what these other folks have just been talking about. As an artist in residence in Stanley Park, I'm curious about how you approached working in that space as a Musqueam person. I know that is a place that's very important to the nations here, and is obviously also a place where I imagine, and maybe this you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that there's a certain amount of translating your work or encounter with people who aren't familiar with Coast Salish forms, or maybe have never heard of Musqueam folks before. So I wanted to know what that process was like for you. Yeah, thanks.
Well, it's been over a year. I'm going into my second year. So originally it was 1 year. Now it's going into the second year. So in the first year, I encountered the public Monday evenings, 5:30 to 8:30, and we had some really good discussions around, you know, what they knew about Coast Salish people, whether that was Musqueam, Squamish, or Tsleil-Waututh. And many didn't know where Musqueam was, where Squamish was, where Tsleil-Waututh was. They didn't learn about the Three Nations growing up in Vancouver. And so it was a bit of schooling around, you know, who we are, and also that Stanley Park was a real important meeting place for the Three Nations, as well as my great-grandmother lived there, and she, her name was Matilda, and so I have family connections as well as the other two nations to Stanley Park. And so just sharing that with people was, you know, really, you know, informative. I had some really good discussions around, you know, why First Nations just, you know, why are they still struggling, you know, and things like that. And I really invite those questions, because I've been learning through my experience, and I worked in the downtown East Side for 4 years as the cultural coordinator at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, and I also worked in our shelter for 2 years as well. So I learned a lot from the urban First Nations who are struggling, and I also learned a lot from members in my community who are struggling. So what I was able to share with the public is that when they had, you know, whether they're second generation, third generation Canadian, and I always encourage that, you know, I don't say not to be proud of who you are. I mean, you have lived here just, you know, maybe, you know, 3 generations, or your family's been here a bit longer, and that's something to be very proud of, and I don't condone that. But what I'd like to inform the public is that, you know, the First Nations were not allowed to be successful like your families. That's why they're still struggling. They were dismantled, their family structures. So their rights to have their families intact was taken away, and it was very intentional. And poverty was a real part of surviving for First Nations people on this land across North America. And they're on reservations to be reserved, to not prosper. And still is the same. We don't have our land. We don't have our sovereignty. We don't have our rights to go and say, you know what, we want to build our land here along the water, because that's where our, great-great-grandmother or grandfather lived. We want to be closer to resources so that we can prosper. And those are really good conversations, and it's really good around reconciliation as well. People are like, oh, I see. And then I talk about the complex trauma of residential schools. I talk about even my generation, even myself. I wasn't physically in residential school, but I experienced the aftermath of residential school through my dad being very angry and violent, really hurt. He was very open, and I think that's because he was an artist as well. He was very comfortable sharing his story. And I was affected, and that's something that I'm also on a journey, on a personal journey, is like, well, where do the 3-4 generations after, where are they being heard and healed? I had that aftermath of that, and I stopped that with my generation. I don't have children yet, but my children will never see anger and violence and walking on eggshells and wondering, what is going on. And what is neat about talking with my late father is that we had conversations and they're really awkward. And I said, well, why were you so mean when I was a kid? And he was like he kind of was a bit shocked, but it was so needed because I needed those answers, and I got them. And he said, when I was growing up, this is what happened in my household, and this is what happened in my dad's household. So this is something we've learned, is you're to be heard. You're to be seen and not to be heard. That's passed down. And you're to work hard and not complain. And he goes, that's all passed down. But what was really neat about that is he apologized to me, and he said, I'm really sorry that I passed that down to you. And I think that's part of the work that still has to be done here with our First Nations people, but also with the non-First Nations people, is that we all have to heal. And that's something I said, I think it was the Vancouver Sun had interviewed me, and I said, healing has to come from all of us, not just from me. There are non-First Nations who have gone through generations of hurt and pain too, and also have not been taught the real history of the First Nations people here. And that, that they need to be taught that, and they have to have some sort of place to go and get that apology from the government or somewhere. And so it's a real journey, and I look forward to having more awkward conversations. And I'm actually going to have some workshops around talking about our stories as First Nations and non-First Nations living in Vancouver. And I want to hear from non-First Nations on what they know, what they'd like to know, and how they're healing, and how they can work along First Nations. And more importantly, they can ask those awkward questions. And so can I. Because I think if we don't talk about it, then we won't get rid of those ideas of racism, of things that are passed down to us. So we have to change that.
Thanks, Chrystal. I think that's about running out of time, so just really like to thank the panel up here, Chrystal, Michelle, Daniel, Cora, Chastity. So yeah, please join me in a round of applause.